Good
Hello.
evening, everyone. We are going to get started. So you have to see what I'm looking at. Welcome to our Meet the Experts evening. Tonight we're going to talk about navigating perinatal mental health. And our topics for this evening, how it's going to go is we're going to start with a presentation on perinatal mental health with our expert, Michelle Baxo, who we're really excited to have here with us. And then there'll be a little Q&A at the end, followed by our breakout rooms. We will give some instructions on the breakout rooms after her presentation. But please, if you could add in your chat at the bottom if you're planning on staying for it so we can get that set up before it starts, that would be really helpful. Thank you. And now I'm just going to share a little bit about Michelle. Michelle is a registered psychotherapist in the qualifying stage. She's focusing her practice on women's mental health, including perinatal, which is the pregnancy and postpartum period, early motherhood, stress, anxiety, anger, depression, motivation, and relationships. She offers a safe space to let it all out, feel seen and heard, while developing skills to support you in your life, goals, relationships, and overall experience of being alive. You can see her in person in Keswick or worldwide virtually, just like this evening over Zoom. And I think the highlight for us is that we're proud to call Michelle one of our clients, and her family was a part of our support. And I'm going to pass it over to her now.
There we go. Volume, right? Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And hello, everyone. It's great to be here. And thank you so much to Helping Hands Doula. As just mentioned, not that long ago. So my second daughter, I'm a mother of two, my second daughter, Olivia, is 18 months now, but I actually took advantage of both types of doula. And it was a game changer for me. I am indebted. Heidi was one of my postpartum doulas. She's here today. I was like so excited to see her. Yeah, I did both. Had the birth doula and two postpartum doulas, and then even like kept them coming back for a little extra afterwards. And it was a really, really big part of, I would actually say, supporting my mental health through that. A little quick backstory in terms of my experience with mental health is after my first child, actually starting in pregnancy, I started experiencing perinatal distress, specifically perinatal anxiety. But the particular midwives and doctors that I was seeing didn't acknowledge that as a thing. Now the research is catching up more and more every year. Now we're acknowledging, and that's why we're hearing the term perinatal instead of just postpartum, because lots can change mental health wise, starting from, well, gosh, it can start even when if you're trying to get pregnant and that fertility process. Certainly, we know there's big changes that happen during pregnancy, and we're more vulnerable to mental health. And then that led to, after having a baby, I dealt with postpartum anxiety and some postpartum depression. Not the worst case scenario version of it, but still very substantial. And a lot of it went unnoticed. And I'm very trained and very well aware. And we had all the people looking for all the things. And the one thing that I really learned for second time around was get all the supports set up in advance. Not waiting until things are really, really hard. So for all of you to be here and looking into doula services, that is such a smart move. And no one's paying me to say this to you. I'm just from mom to moms. It's such a great thing because having people to support you in whatever way you think and feel most comfortable getting that support is a great step towards supporting your mental health. Psychotherapy is another way. And so as and I'll tell you a little bit, like today, mostly I want to be talking about, different aspects of perinatal mental health and what to be watching for, what to be paying attention to, and just having some of the language can be really helpful. And then I'll also give you some insight into why some people choose psychotherapy as an additional support, whether that's starting in advance or starting later, but just so you have that information to take the mystique out of it, maybe, in case it's something that you believe might or would be a fit for you. Okay. And yeah, if there's ever any questions at any point, please put them in the chat. I don't know if I can see them during, but someone will tell me afterwards for sure. And then please, whoever's in charge, interrupt me if there is something I should speak to in the meantime, please. Thank you so much. So one thing is, and it's funny, in order for you hear a lot about break the stigma, break the stigma, break the stigma of mental health. We see, commercials about it, ads about it, memes about it. Except one of the things I think gets missed is acknowledging the stigma. So we all say that, but do we acknowledge the stigma? And most importantly, do we acknowledge the stigma that we hold ourselves? And that is, again, easy to say for other people to do, a little harder for each of us to do. And it's like, it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of like a lot of other stigmas where we know not to do it, but that doesn't mean it isn't happening. So one of the things I would invite each of you watching, and doulas included, just in general, is to start thinking about, if I assumed I did have some sort of stigma, some sort of like shyness or embarrassment or any kind of stigma around mental health, what might it be? So if we start from assuming we all do to some degree, it gets a little bit easier to start going, oh yeah, well, professionally, like one of the things that I had to recognize as I first started 11 years ago working in mental health was, oh, if I see a therapist, does that mean I'm not good at my job? Does that mean that da 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 da, And so I had to start dealing with my own stigma around it. What do I make seeing a therapist mean if I think as a therapist I can't see a therapist sometimes, right? And what is that, so again, I'm inviting each of you to be looking to yourself to go, okay, what am I assuming anything? And some of you maybe not, maybe some of you like really are super comfortable with it, but then you can look and any assumptions that come up, any things you say to yourself about that, right? So to sum that up, in order to break the stigma, we really need to like admit where we have it and look and go hunting for it a little bit so that we can allow for more conversations. One of the top things I hear from my clients, which are mostly new moms, that's the majority of people that I work with, are, within like anywhere between just very shortly after giving birth or within usually about the 2-3 years after. That's the majority of my clientele. And oh geez, I forgot what I was going to say there. That's so funny. This is something that happens to me sometimes. I should let you know where my mind goes a little bit. It's the mommy brain, right? And where we got to break the stigma and go, Michelle, that happens sometimes and everything's going to be okay. All right. That's so funny. So I was going to tell you something about the clients that I work with, but I'm sure it'll come back to me at another time. So breaking the stigma, looking at, a lot of people are getting a lot. Oh yeah, we don't really talk about, this is what it is. We don't really talk to each other that much about it. And one of the things that's so great to have doulas around is, they're working with women all the time in this exact situation. There's so much experience. There's so much normalizing. It's incredibly comforting, right? And we want, in general, more people to be talking about their experience. And this is what it is. A common thing that people come and they say is, why didn't anyone tell me about this? I thought no one told me about this part. No one told me how lonely it was going to feel. No one told me that that I was going to want to divorce my spouse shortly afterwards and that it doesn't have to go that way, but that's really super common. No one told me I was going to have crazy, scary thoughts about harming my child when I know I'm not going to, and that doesn't mean I'm an actual threat to my child, for example, right? That this is a super normal that 8 out of 10 women actually deal with. So, and I hope I'm not scaring anybody as I say this, but it's more like we need to be having more of these conversations. So the more people we don't want to get spooked by people, but it's nice to have different people that really, really know whether it's through their own lived experience or through being an expert in the profession, to help normalize the kinds of things that might come up for you. And we want it to be so easy for each and every mom to get whatever she needs, because it's not all created equal. It's not the same babies. It's not the same moms. And from a mental health perspective, our brains, and a lot of people don't know this. And finally, this, like, the science has been catching up more and more and more, where we're deciphering science and mental health science between males and females and in different periods of women's lives, because our brains and our nervous system and our hormones are very different, through like distinctly different, and impact our mental health at different periods. So it's finally catching up that there's people actually funding this kind of research. But what a lot of people don't realize is that our brain, each woman's brain has a certain level of sensitivity to hormonal changes. And starting from puberty, it's different, and it can change over time. So this is why some people get PMS and some people don't. Some people get it really bad. Some people have PMDD, which is like PMS on steroids. And other people are like, what? Like, I just, like my mom was one of those lucky ones that just doesn't even know what that means to get PMS. Damn you. So we know that, so even just through that, and as I say that, I know you can relate to it, that all brains responses, like automatic, it's nothing to do with tools or abilities or anything, but some brains are more sensitive to those hormonal changes, and it can impact the brain chemistry. Okay. After a pregnancy, no matter how that pregnancy goes, after any pregnancy, that level of sensitivity can change. And after each pregnancy, it can change. And usually it doesn't change it usually becomes more sensitive, not the other way around, right? So if this isn't your first child, and say, and you didn't experience, and things seemed like okay, and then what can happen is then a new one comes and you go, wait, but this baby's sleeping. Why am I struggling? But wait, my friend over here has 6 kids and she seems to be okay. How come I'm having such a tough time, with one, or with a baby that doesn't have colic? We start comparing and thinking, is there something wrong with me? And I'm here to tell you, no, it's not fair. And it just is, but it's an unfortunate reality that really your brain just may have become more sensitive to it. Also, as a heads up, and I don't know if we have any spouses here or not, because I can't see everybody. But for the primary caregiver, which I'm going to say the mom, but depending on the scenario and all of that, right? For the primary caregiver, the moment you become the primary caregiver, which for many is once that baby is born, and if you start nursing as that, or the feeding, or the waking up at nights, one becomes the one that's going to be tending to the most. And that person's brain actually changes. It actually changes. It can be seen. It's not theoretical. It's shown. And that part that does the fight or flight, that assesses risk, is the part that changes, and it grows. So this is why, and it's a heads up, this is why the primary, usually the mom, the primary caregiver, wakes up when you hear like tiny little squeak, and the spouse, who is often but not always the dad, can sleep through it all. And it's terribly discouraging. It's terribly frustrating, but it's important to know that it's not from caring less. It's not from any of that. Literally, our brains change the moment we become I'm saying specifically primary caregiver, because part of this research checked to see if there's 2 male parents, if it would happen to one, and it did. So that's why I don't specifically just say mother, but it is often the mother. Let me see. So fight and fight or flight, we got brain's response. Yep. Okay, really good. So the thing that, another term that often isn't talked about, and like, I wish that we were all talking about it, is something called matrescence. And some of you have maybe started hearing about it. It's being talked about a little bit more. It's kind of reaching the social media on, in some spaces, right? I was shocked that, like, I worked with midwives for both of my pregnancies, and I was shocked that it never came up. But matrescence is a term that is speaking to the process of becoming a mother. So we know the term adolescence, right? And one of the reasons that term is coined, because of the physical, hormonal, mental, chemical changes and lifestyle changes that go on in a person's life during that period, that significant period of adolescence. We're also very compassionate and understanding. There's been tons of research about it. We know that that's where mental health issues often begin or can begin, right? But no one's been talking about matrescence, which actually is more scientifically significant in terms of the changes that are going on in, like, mind, body, life, all of it. It's way more significance in matrescence. And yet it didn't even get coined. That term didn't even get coined until the 1970s. And most of us don't even know that that's a thing, right? And that's part of what can sometimes bring some stigma around needing extra support, because it's like, we could just are kind of, but women have been doing this forever. What do you mean? Like, and yes, they have, and yes, they've been struggling 100%, right? And so what we're, those of us that are really committed to this area, we're committed that that people get the modified and unique level of support that they need, and that we normalize the struggle so that people can ask for and get and understand, like, what are the parts we can't change and what are the parts we can. And so, if we look at the, okay, well, what if I can't do anything about it? Does that mean I'm doomed? Right. Well, like anything, and if we look at, for example, this is different, but with the learning disabilities, someone may, have a certain level of neurodivergence. And so therefore they may need different things than someone else may need in order to thrive, or in order to cope, or in order, depending on what it is. Right. And well, it's similar to that. It's just that it may not be long. It's, likely not, hopefully not long-term and forever. So there are different skills. There are different practices for whether it may be for coping with something that like a situation, like if anyone tells you just try to get a little more sleep, it's like, I've been trying since pregnancy and I can't, and, so like, that's not necessarily helpful. So then what can we do to cope with having less sleep, knowing that we're way more vulnerable to mental health struggles? We're way more vulnerable to anxiety, to symptoms of depression, to rage, right? Like some serious anger and rage that we don't want to come out or anyone to see, right? So all of these different types of things can happen. So there's coping, but then there's also skills. There's also skills that we can, that we or you, or however you want to do it, can develop to support yourself. And the more we do that, the more equipped we are to deal with the level of, stress or strain that there is going on in your life, in yourself, in your family, and so on, right? I could go on for a long time, but I know that there's like a time limit here. Where am I at? Do I need to wrap this up, or do I have a couple
You
minutes?
can keep going.
All right, cool.
You're doing
All right, great. So that's matrescence. Okay. And if there's one thing I want you to take away from it, I want you to get, it's a real thing and it's really hard. Okay. And technically that term matrescence starts when we are like after birth, but I would argue it starts like as soon as you're working to become a mom, or certainly once you're pregnant, because our brain starts wrapping our head around this whole new idea, right? And again, there's the physical components of it, but there's also like the who am I? And like our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with our bodies, our relationship with our spouse, our family members, our parents, like all, and with our, with our child, it all starts changing. And we can't help it, but we go in with certain expectations, certain things that we've pictured, because what else do we have? We have no other data but then what we're anticipating or what we've seen before. So when it inevitably is different, because we couldn't possibly know what something's going to be like before it happens, that can sometimes just thinking that it should be something different can cause a certain level of distress as well. So coming to terms with, say, if there was a traumatic birth, working through any birth trauma that can happen, and that can be big or small. Sometimes grief, even from the past, can come up in the birth of a child. And it's sort of this, I feel so great, but I feel so bad also at the same time, right? let's just see. There's in general, there's postpartum distress disorders like that are in the, the actual diagnoses. In psychotherapy, we don't diagnose, but we do like use the familiar language, and we recognize, and we often work with people. So sometimes people want to get a diagnosis from their doctor and then they come with that information. It's not necessary at all, but we certainly are familiar, very familiar working with postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, postpartum rage. Often we just call it postpartum distress because it can look a lot of different ways. And then for something like postpartum psychosis, which most people don't hear about, we're all afraid of it. Most people don't hear about because it's so incredibly rare. Okay. And that's where there's actual significant hallucinations and loss of control over actions happening. It's so incredibly rare. I don't want anyone worrying about it. It's just good to know that if it really is like something scary, you want to, like, it's an emergency, you want to go to the hospital, right? If you feel completely disconnected from who you are. But if you have any but it would more likely be someone letting you know you need to in that case. If you have any way of recognizing, oh, I just thought of something so horrendous, I just had a vision of something terribly awful, and like that scared me. If you have that feeling, you're actually probably, you might want help, but that's not psychosis, right? Because you're aware of it and you're recognizing and you're disturbed by it. Okay. But like I said, we don't do diagnosing, but we often work with people who've received a diagnosis, but it's totally not necessary at all. All right. And you don't need to have it doesn't need to be at that degree in order to do therapy either. And that's what I did. So for my second time around, I was like, okay, I'm getting a therapist. Like as soon as I started trying to have my second baby, I'm like, I'm getting a therapist because I want to know that I like my therapist before I have the baby, because I don't want to be looking for a new one after having a baby. I found my doulas. Right. I had that. I personally used a midwife, whatever. You sort of find like what really fits, what feels like almost too much support. And then you're like, good, because it's very difficult when we're struggling to get what we need, because we go into some version of survival mode and problem solving and taking those actions aren't always accessible mentally or emotionally when we're dealing with that. Relationship difficulties, like I said earlier, are really common and for all kinds of different relationships. But parental, in-laws, it's complicated once you have a kid. It adds a different complication for many people, and that relationship with spouse. Some really do great with couples therapy. And sometimes that's not accessible. Sometimes the spouse won't, right? And I always say it's better for one than for none. So there's lots that can be done inside of a relationship with just one human being. And if nothing else, if you're the one getting it, then at least you're getting support in coping with whatever you're dealing with, learning some skills and strategies, and also getting some clarity around, how much of this is my hormones, let's say, and how much of this is a real problem to address, and having some support through that as well. I mean, if anyone ever wants to ask about how therapy works, every therapist is different because there's so many different types of like modalities and therapeutic approaches. We all do, most do specialized training in maybe particular populations. Like I've done specialized training in the perinatal mental health area and population, but also in different types of therapy. So I work with DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, CBT, ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy, also polyvagal theory, and internal family systems, which is working with the parts within ourselves. So when we feel like we're arguing with ourselves or we feel like a part of us takes over, working with that system so that internally, so that's deeper, more inner work. And I'm a big fan of everything holistic. I love mindfulness. I love somatic work. There's just so many different ways. I come from a big personal growth and development background, and there's just so many ways that we can support ourselves and empower ourselves with whatever we're dealing with. So I just like having a massive toolbox. But I'm sharing this with you because you want to find the right therapist for you if you do want to move forward with psychotherapy. And it's good to ask about the different ways that they do it, because we're not all the same. We have our degree, we are a part of the college, but then how we expand and develop our practice is unique to each therapist. That makes sense. So we'll close it there. I will say that if anyone, I am in Georgina, I'm in Keswick. And so in person, I'm at Anchor. There is one other psychotherapist there as well. And she specializes in youth and family. She also does couples. I work with couples as well. But so if you know Keswick, it's right on the Queensway. It's Anchor. It's a health and fitness. And so you can find either of us there. I also have my own private practice that I do virtually. So if you look at the calendar and you're like, I need something different, I'm sure the Helping Hands Doula can get you in contact with me or in some way. Well, you can find me. And then I can let you know about my additional hours that I do virtually. All right. That's it.
Too many tabs. I'm flipping all over the place, getting things opened up. Thank you so much, Michelle. That was wonderful. That was great information and advice. And absolutely, we can help get everyone connected to you as needed. I'm going to pause the recording.